This is the first edition of our DE&I Champions for Change initiative, one of the takeaways from our Blue Ribbon Commission on Racial Equity. I'm really excited that a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission, Marc Howze, is joining us for this first session. And it's amazing because before we were even ready to get started in our work, Marc was already making moves with a John Deere, an organization in which he holds a number of leadership roles. And he's also figured out a way to make connections between what he does for a living and all of the social impact work that he's been doing in the community, namely with an organization near and dear to my heart, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. So I'm so excited to have Marc Howze here this morning. Marc, how are you?
I'm doing exceptionally well. Thank you very much, Emily. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're making it.
Good.
We're doing this. Now, where are you today?
I'm in Houston, Texas.
Okay, he's in Houston, Texas. That's great because you are likely to be anywhere anytime I talk to you. So I'm glad that you're safe in Houston. And I'm
Me
so
too.
glad, I know, right? And I'm so glad you had time to take out your busy schedule to talk to us today. So tell everyone a little bit about what it is you do at John Deere, because you've got a pretty big job.
Yeah, well, my title is Group President, Lifecycle Solutions and Chief Administrative Officer, which means on the business side, I have responsibility for our lifecycle solutions, which includes all of our parts business, which is a pretty large business that we have around the world. We've got 35 plus facilities around the world that we deal with parts. Also includes, and that's the real function piece of that, but it includes how we think about the entire life cycle. So all of our connected support tools, all the way we can interact and predict and forecast issues that will happen with the machine, because our machines are connected. So we're getting data from machines all the time to be able to understand what's going on with those machines, that part of the business, as well as supply management for the organization. So I also have responsibility for the enterprise supply management globally. Also responsibility for human resources on the administrative side of human resources, labor relations, communications, the John Deere Foundation, the John Deere brand, and all of our brand licensing, aviation, security, a bunch of stuff.
A bunch of stuff.
Bunch of stuff.
That's why I'm so glad you could do this with us this morning, because that's right. That's a bunch of stuff that you're responsible for. And
well, you prioritize what's important, right?
That's
and
working
right. with you guys is important. So,
and I have to say, you've made all of our meetings except for one. And right after the meeting was over, you called immediately after to get the download. So that tells me just how important this is to you. And I think what people may not realize, with all the things you named, you're what we call an HR accountable. That's a segment of our membership that are not necessarily HR professionals, but they ultimately have oversight for the human resources function within the organization. I think that's one of the reasons why the work we've been trying to do on racial equity in the workplace has resonated with you.
Yep. And among all the other jobs, I'm a lawyer by profession, as are you. And I've had a variety of jobs, but among them was CHRO. And so the CHRO reports to me now, is one of the folks that I've worked with for years and helped develop. And so it's something where I may not have grown up as an HR professional, but it's something that I've worked with very closely for almost 10 years now.
Wow. So what people don't know is, on these calls with these video chats we've had with the Blue Ribbon Commission, you're one of our most vocal members. You won't speak a whole lot, but when you speak, it is you are very transparent. And I'd love for you to share with everyone your journey as it relates to racial equity in the workplace and why you're so passionate about this.
Well, it's I remember I had a boss once. I got the opportunity to run a manufacturing facility in North Carolina, and that was the first time. It wasn't the first time John Deere had a black factory manager. It was the second time, but I think we were 180, 175 years old at the time, and that was the second time we had a black factory manager, and the prior one had happened almost 30 years before. And so for most people, they thought I was the first black factory manager. And so I had a conversation with somebody, actually it was a CEO. And after I'd been there about 6 months, and he asked me, and this is how attuned he was. He said, "How is it being a black factory manager in the South?" And I said, thanks for asking the question. And I said, I've been Black all my life. I never had a problem with it. Me being Black is not a problem for me. It could be a problem for somebody else, but it's not a problem for me. And I'm not going to make it my problem. That said, I've got to figure out a way to get these folks who may be used to working with Black people, but not for Black people, to work for me so that we can all be successful. And so, when you ask the question about my journey, the fact is I've been Black all my life. And, whether it's in college, when you walk in and people say, you're not like other Black people. And you ask, well, how many Black people do you know? And well, I really don't know any. Well, so then how do you know I'm different than everybody else? And what you realize is that, what they're saying is I have a poor conception of Black people based on media, based on whatever, not based on my own personal experience though, because I've never met any, but I have a poor experience. I have a poor impression of Black people. You don't meet that impression. So I have two choices. I can either say, maybe my impressions are, maybe my biases in this are wrong. Maybe my thoughts about Black people are wrong, or I can say, no, they're right. You're just different. Right. And so my journey around this is one that is, it's a constant. It doesn't change from whether you're sort of college student or whether you're the group president waiting at the airport at the assigned place for somebody to pick you up, your driver to pick you up. And the driver looks you in the eye and drives past you to the white guy down the road because he says, well, I'm supposed to pick up a Deere executive and it can't be him. Right. So it's something you deal with on a regular basis. And the point is you've got to figure out how to, what I would say, be the Black man in the room, and drive the change you need without getting bitter and taking yourself out the game because you let every micro indiscretion take you off your game. All those things are just nuisances that serve to take you off your game. And so either I'm going to be dealing with all these little microaggressions that don't really mean anything. It can't stop me from doing anything, or I'm going to stop what I'm doing in order to address stuff that doesn't matter. So some of that stuff, you just let it go. And that guy, he finally, as I walked to the car, he looked, when the other guy said, hey, I'm not the guy you're looking for. And I started walking toward the car and he looked back and saw me. And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I said, don't worry about it. No, I said, I know what you did. We don't have to talk about it. And then he got in the car. And then what he said was, I'm glad to pick you up. I used to be an ex-police officer. And then I said, ain't that something? Right. So my point is, I don't care if you're a student or whether you're, my boss is the chairman of the company, whether you're at the highest levels of your profession, it's still something you've got to deal with.
No, I'm laughing at you because I think the first time I finally got to a point where someone was going to meet me at an airport, and imagine, in their mind, Emily Dickens doesn't look like Emily Dickens.
Right.
And it's the same thing where they just kind of just don't see you.
Exactly.
And it is me toting along my Black husband with me too, and we're going to get in this car. So I absolutely get it. So let's talk about it. Not only have you been making history and doing these types of things, but remember, you're in an industry, agriculture. Mm-hmm. That when you think about the history of minorities, of Black people, Black farmers in agriculture, especially in the South, when we talk about these issues, the fact that people have lost legacy land, the fact that for years, as someone who's done government affairs, I can tell you that ag bill for years has been mired in the lawsuit, the Black farmers lawsuit. Yep. You're in an industry that now, I remember when Johnny came back and said, that Marc said most of the tractors they use now they've got computers on them. These things are like huge computers. This is not like before. And I know many of these minority farmers probably don't even have access to that type of equipment that can make them viable suppliers and partners for a company like John Deere. So talk to me, as you saw this, you decided you wanted to do something about it. And you were working on this long before there were issues, long before that fateful day this May, when we all saw the tragedy that occurred. Talk to me about why you thought this could happen. And for our members, they're very tactical. They want to know how you did it, who you talked to, who were your partners. Can you talk to me a little bit about the project that I think is a DE&I champion, makes you a DE&I champion for change?
Well, yeah, I think I'd say a couple points. One is it's important to not wait until you think you are at a position to do something. There's a statement that says bloom where you're planted, right? And the reality is each of us, no matter what our role is, no matter what our title is, no matter how many direct reports or not we have, we see situations that need addressing. And when those things happen, we can either let it go or we can say something about it. And I think it's important to always, your brand should be that you are a champion for doing the right thing at the right time. It's always the right time to do the right thing, right? And so you've got to figure out a way to constantly say, I'm not going to wait until I think I got some power to do this, because at that time you won't do it. You got to build the muscle of dealing with issues that arise when they arise and continue to do it. So I'll give you a real example about what we call LEAP coalitions, legislative advocacy, education, and progress. And it's really about air property. And so one of the things that I know is if you go back to 1910, Black folks had about 16 million acres. 1910. So think about how many folks there were in the country in 1910. Fast forward to the size of the country we have now, and Black folks have less than 4 million, right? And so, and a lot of that land loss, I'd argue most of that land loss happened involuntarily. So a lot of what you saw at the turn of the century around lynchings and other violence that happened was as a result of driving Black people off their land. This is the fact, right? And sometimes, and so what ended up happening is, if you go back, and it's happened in my family. On my father's side, they lost the property. On my dad, they're both from Alabama. On my mother's side, you had folks who had been prohibited from reading, right? So if you think about folks, my grandfather was born in 1890s, 1893, I think, to be exact. That's what we believe. It could have been 1892, but at any rate, they could read a little bit. But if you go back a generation, it was illegal for them to read, right? You couldn't teach them to read. And so, one, they didn't trust lawyers, because lawyers would be, were largely the vehicle that they lost the property through. And so what they would do is leave the property to their children, and their children would farm that land. And those children would leave it to their children. And so heirs would end up owning this property. And so I have a situation now on my other side where we got property in Alabama, and there are probably 40 or 50 of us who have some claim to title for that land. And so what's the point? The point is a farmer's number one asset is his farm or her farm. And when you have a piece of some collateral that's paid for, that you own, but you can't leverage it for loans or anything else because the title is not clear, then farmers actually borrow money in the beginning of the season. They plant, they put it in the ground, and then they reap the harvest and they pay off the bills. That's kind of the cycle that farmers go through. Well, if you can't use your number one asset in order to get to leverage to borrow money, then you're always in a hole. And also, you're not eligible. You may not be eligible for a lot of the government assistance that other farmers might be eligible for, because you don't have clear title to the land. So we can't give you assistance because we don't know if it's really your land, right? And so, air property is really thinking about how do we create situations where we unlock the value. So when George Floyd and the tragedy around his murder and the things that happened prior to that happened, companies got very virtuous, right? They started sending checks to people. And my said, hey, this is not about sending checks to people and then saying I'm done. This is about there's no social justice without economic justice. And so how do we improve the economics of people? How do we improve access to capital for Black folks? How do we improve, strengthen our institutions? That is the key, not sort of send some money to people you don't know. But what about investing in the people you do know, right? So if you want to, do something about education, why give money to people you don't know when you've got people, your own employees sitting in your company that you aren't investing in? You know them. They've made a commitment to you. And yet you'll give money to other folks, but you won't provide that same level of resource to your own employees or your own customers. And so, we really started to think about this. So the conversations with my chairman and CEO around this, around the business roundtable, put some stuff together. How do we focus on, there was some thing, hey, you should join the education and welfare piece of this. Nah, I mean, what? So in 20 years, when somebody, an elementary school student graduates from college, we can say we did something. No, what can we do right now to improve the lot of Black people economically? And so we really got focused on access to capital. And the thought is, what are we uniquely positioned to do? So the same thing I use for people, individuals saying, what are you uniquely positioned to do based on, the things that you come in contact with to drive more equity in the environment in which you work? The same thing, I put the same question on us. And so then it was, how do we help Black folks get title to their property? Right? That's the main question. How do we do that? Well, that's a legal issue. So for me, it's about the ecosystem. So we don't trust lawyers. Folks in that situation don't trust lawyers to begin with. So you got to have lawyers that have the right sensibilities. And so I said, how can we create an ecosystem that does this? So let's go to Thurgood Marshall College Fund that has several Black law schools, that have several Black folks that are going to law, who are practicing to be lawyers. And let's fund those internships for those people to work at the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives is the premier organization, what I'd say the premier Black farmer organization that operates in 17 states, and they have an heirs right conference every year. And so what they do, their number one thing they do is really figure out how to get title for Black folks. And they have lawyers on staff, and that's what they do. And so let's get some lawyers, let's fund that in order to, so they don't have to spend that money on that now. Let's put an ecosystem together where we take Black students at Black schools and we fund those students to help Black people get title to that land that Black folks own. And so that, for generations, that land can stay in that land, because a lot of that land that was lost is still being farmed. It's just not farmed by Black folks, right? So how do we create a situation where we can have a virtuous cycle where we're helping each other create better access to capital in a position where we are uniquely positioned to play? Maybe banks aren't positioned to do that because they don't work in this space. We do. And we have a credit company, John Deere Financial. So it's kind of thinking through all the areas where you have relationships and trying to put together something that actually creates an ecosystem where we help people all along the way that help each other. And then you got this virtuous cycle of things that at the end of the day create more economic opportunity for Black folks.
So I'm sitting here and I remember my biggest struggle when we were at TMCF was I felt we could be doing something else for the law students. As a graduate of one of those Black HBCUs, it was the one project that I kept thinking, how can we really make a difference? What an opportunity and what an ecosystem, because now you're creating social activists, lawyers who now understand early in their careers how they can make a difference in the long term. And then the fact that you're using, your organization says, what are we uniquely positioned to do?
Yep.
And so for those who are listening, who may not be reporting directly to the chairman, talk to me about what your team looks like, who else has been helping you with this, and how is there any engagement from HR in this? Anyone sitting at the table from your HR department talking through this? What's a role that someone who is in this profession would be playing in this? And then after that, then let's talk about how tactically someone could do this within their organization.
Okay. I think it's all about, keeping your old friends and getting new ones, right? And so there are a lot of people that work in this. So I'll give you an example. So as we thought about this, there's a legislative aspect to this. So I called, the guy that runs I used to also have responsibility for government and public affairs too. And one of the people that I hired is the person who runs our government affairs for U.S. State and federal. It's a guy named Collis Jones, and Collis' brother, exceptionally talented. And I said, Collis, how can we start to work with the members on the Hill? How can we start to work from an advocacy perspective in order to help create laws and regulations that help facilitate owners, clearing title to this land? I talked to folks in HR, and there's a brother who runs. For me, one of the things I did when I had HR was I put D&I and global staffing together. So if you got diversity, equity, inclusion, but you don't have a big budget, and you don't determine the hiring and firing, then you just got, you really ain't got much. You're running around trying to convince people to do stuff, right? And you got a nice title, but you can't really drive anything. So I put those two together. So now this person says where we go hire. They decide what schools we go and deal with, what organizations we deal with, so we can make sure that we're fishing in the right pond, right? Because if you're not if you're not fishing in the right pond, you can't get saltwater fish in the river, right? You gotta go to where what you're looking for is, right? And so putting those two things together helps. So I engaged HR because we're going to engage Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which is a place where we recruit, right, at these schools to also engage. We are engaged in the legislative piece of this. We engage our communications folks because we want to figure out how do we communicate this to our employees and others. We engage the brother who is he actually runs the sales and marketing for all of our parts business, or our Lifecycle business for all of US and Canada and Australia and New Zealand. We engage him in this, saying, at the end of the day, we got to engage other farmers. We engage the National Black Growers Council, because once you get the title clear, you may not be farming it. That land may have now be more of a forest than a farm. And so you got to figure out, how do you clear the property? How do you, put it back into productive agriculture? So we engage with the National Black Growers Council to help, figure out, okay, once it's done, they can rent this land, improve it, and now improve the value of the land and put it back into production. So it's a matter of putting all these pieces together. And, we also include, our chairman and CEO. And so as we think about, we got a new administration coming in, and we're going to have a new Secretary of Agriculture. And we're going to go talk to the Secretary of Agriculture about our priorities. And one of our priorities is, how do we help ensure that Black folks get access to the capital they need to farm, and also help us clear title for these folks so they can now actually have title to the land that they really own, right? So it's you got to put all the pieces together, because not one of these pieces can make it happen. You need all of these things together. And so now people that are involved in this are hearing it come from their various people. We also, with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, we've worked with them. So we made a commitment to them that for the next 5 years, we're going to fund the Heirs Property Conference for the next 5 years. So don't, I'm not sending a check and be done. I'm making a commitment to you for at least the next 5 years. All of this is going to happen. And we're continuing to develop, okay, first we got to do that, then we got to do this, then we got to do the next thing. And how do we continue to do that? And given my wide range of responsibilities, I hired somebody, a Deere employee, full-time, to work on this initiative. That's their full-time job, right? So it's not something that is just like, I want people to do when they got some side, it's like your side hustle. No. This is we pay you. We're going to pay a resource full time to help drive this initiative, because we believe in it that powerfully. And so the point is, one of my rules is, I got a couple. Never take yourself out the game, right? You never say, I can't do it. No. The other is, make them tell you no, right? If it's something you believe is the right thing, and you think this is something you really want to do, don't talk yourself out of it and say, well, they'll never go for it, or they'll never do it, or they'll never, I'm not sure if this will be career limiting no, make them tell you no. Put your plan together and say, this is really what I want to do. I used to be the corporate secretary for Deere, and it was one of our chairmen. His name was Bob Lane, great guy. And so as a secretary, you get a chance to sit in the room and see really smart people, great business minds, and how they work. So you're at the meeting, but not in the meeting, right? So you get a chance to see everything. And I used to ask him questions why did you do this? Or why did you do that? Because I wanted to learn from him about things. And I said, how do you decide what to do? I mean, all these ideas that come up, and how do you discern which are the things that you really want to invest your time in and things you don't? And he said to me, there's no shortage of ideas. The problem, that's a good question, but that's not the right question. The real issue for me is not that, not the ideas. Every idea I get is a good idea, because all the bad ideas get killed before they get to me. The real issue is all the great ideas that never make it to me because people say, nah, he'll never go for it. And so, I think we need to be bold in the spaces that we're in if we think this is the right thing to do to help drive what we're trying to do. I think all too often we think the culture of a company is sort of these rules that we have, right? So, tell me about your culture. You're going to go look at the rules, you're going to look at the policies, you're going to look at it, and that's fine, but those are really guardrails. People experience culture and how they interact with the people they work with. That's how you really experience the culture, right? If the people you work with and for are people that try to develop you and try to invest in you and try to get the best out of you every day, I don't care what the rules of the company are, you're going to feel like that's an inclusive place to be, and that's a good culture. Likewise, if you got all the policies in place and all the everything, but the people you work for play you to the left, they don't invite you to the meetings. They don't, when you raise your hand, they act like they didn't hear you. When you have an idea, nobody says it, but when the other person at the table says the same thing and everybody does this, I don't care what your policies say. For yourself that that's not a good culture, right? So I think the important piece of this is figuring out how to continue to drive forward, regardless of what your position is, to make sure we're doing the right things.
So I love this. First of all, my husband would love for you to pack the fact that you talked about being corporate secretary, because I have that role, and the average person doesn't know what you do in that role. And so you're so right. You get to really see the nucleus of the company, the people who are advising your company's leaders, and hearing those business minds. Really, that's a great professional development. People don't even think about it, because it does prepare you for some other things. So that's one piece. But I think there are two things that are really clear. You said, look, how can your organization make the most impact, right? What is it you are uniquely situated to do that can make the most impact? So I would say that to those watching, that's number one. But number two, you can make a difference from anywhere within the organization. It doesn't matter. And then I think also number three is you have friends all around the organization. So for those in HR, you can come up with an idea and you don't have to be dependent on HR to make it happen. You've got friends in government affairs. You've got friends in comms. You've got friends who would be willing to sit down and noodle on this idea that could be the great idea that never got before the chairman because you didn't bet on yourself. You didn't bet on sharing that idea. And then something else we talk about a lot about how culture trumps compliance every day. We talk about that, and it's so important. And you're right. We're all HR professionals can end up looking at all the rules and saying we've got the right rules, we've got this. But if they're used as guardrails as opposed to developing a culture where people feel like they're included and that their voice matters, that makes a real difference. And so I would say, what does success, I think my last question to you on this is, what does success look like? You've invested in this. You got a full-time staff member. You got at least 5 years of money. And I don't know how much time did you tell TMCF you're going to support these law school students too? So you got 5 years of committed to the conference. You're in this.
We've been with TMCF for a long time. Right. But we're committed to have these law students. I want to, my view is get these folks through law school, and then my vision is, and then fund them as fellows to do this work, right, afterwards, right? So it may not be 10 law students that we fund, as fellows, but if we can get, a few through and have two or three who actually go into and do that work for a year or two, then that's going to be really good work, right? That will position them well for something else. Because the hard thing is, how do you, as a new lawyer, get really good work and not sit in on somebody and watch somebody do a deposition, right? But really get real work that you're actively involved in. And this will have them involved with clients, with the law, with judges, negotiating between family members, on the resolution. So a lot of the skills that you're going to need to have, they're going to start develop these as interns, and then hopefully as fellows, they'll be ready to do this. So at the end, bottom line, I like to keep it simple. Do more black people have title to their property than had it when we started? Right? If that's the case, then everything else is chit chat, right? If there's more awareness and that's fine, but that's not the point. The point is, do more black people have, own the property, have title to property that didn't have it before? That's the only success measure. And so that is what we're looking for. And again, it's something that our company is committed to. And for me, I want to make sure that we put an infrastructure in place so that this is not my project, right? And so that if I retire or if I'm gone, that okay, we can get out of that. No, I'm trying to integrate this into what we're doing. I mean, I don't sit on the board at TMCF anymore. I used to be on the board member at Thurgood Marshall College Fund, but I'm not. I haven't been for several years, but I'm still very committed to it. And Deere has a board member. There's another Deere employee who's a board member there, because I want to make sure that is long after I'm gone, when I'm gone home to glory. If TMCF is still around, I want to make sure that Deere still a significant partner for them. And you do that by creating an infrastructure and an ecosystem, so it's not driven by one person, but there are a lot of people who have an interest in making sure that this happens, and making sure it's successful. One thing I know is success has many parents, and failure is an orphan. And so the more successful we are, the more everybody's going to jump in and be on the bandwagon of it. And so for me, being successful and not sort of doing a whole lot of talking about it, but being about it. One of the things that, a lot of the stuff that happens, all these pledges. We're going to sign a pledge to hire 1 million Black people. We're going to sign a pledge to spend more money with Black law firms. We're going to sign a pledge. Why do you need to sign a pledge to spend more money with Black law firms when you spend money with Black law firms? You spend money with lawyers now. Just do it. You don't have to pledge to do so. That's like pledging to brush your teeth in the morning, right? You brush your teeth in the morning? Yeah, but I don't have to send a pledge to do it. It's something you do. So just do it, right? And for me, pledges are a way, just like, going to a nice dinner. Well, what does your company do? Oh, we support, X organization. How do you do that? Well, we buy a table every year. So you just, you go get a chicken dinner at a hotel and you think you did something. But all it is virtual signaling. I'm gonna, I sent some money, I got a check, I sent my check, and I'm done. No, that's not done. And I think it is as long as we are okay, those of us who can actually have an impact are okay with sort of mailing that in, then that'll continue to be what it always is. And so you won't find Deere signing a lot of these pledges, and it's not because we aren't committed to it. It's because we are committed to it. And we're committed to it so much that we don't need to say in 20 years, we're going to do something. Let's start doing it today. And as we begin to do it today, it may not be public and people may not see it, but the folks that it matters to will know that it's happening. And the more we can do that, the more help we can get, the more people we can engage in this process, not because they want the publicity of it, but because they believe in the mission, because they believe in the outcomes, then I think we're doing the right thing. So,
well, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough. I think this is an excellent example to lead off with, because it shows patience, it shows thoughtfulness. It's not going to be a one-hit wonder. And I think people have to understand you got to play the long game when you're thinking about making changes like this and being champions of change. And you can't do it yourself, by yourself. You need a team. And so none of the people watching, you shouldn't feel alone. There are others that are willing, that look nothing like you, people who
Right.
understand it's the right thing to do, that we can do more and we can do better. People just like Marc Howze, who
Yep.
is out here making change every day, and being a mentor. I have to say, I have a good friend that went to A&T who works for John Deere, and he speaks so highly of you. You're such a great example for others who are coming up behind you. And I just want to say thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to serve on the BRC. We're getting close to finishing up that work. And is there anything you want to say to the members about BRC? I know we talk about, people think we think it's going to be a solution. Really, it's an opportunity for us to discuss an issue and figure out a game plan. Is there anything you want to say to our members about that work?
I'd say it's extremely important work. And I would just commend you. I commend SHRM leadership, the SHRM board, and Johnny for putting together a really diverse set of folks to really think about how to address this issue. And I think I just build on one point you made, that this is not something that gets done. It didn't get broken in a couple days or a couple weeks or a couple months or a couple years. This is something that our country has struggled with since its inception, right? And we're trying to make improvements in this, and we're better today than we were yesterday. And I think the point is that I think the word says this way: be not don't get weary, be not weary in well doing, for in due season you will reap if you faint not. And so the point is, we may not get it all done during our tenure in work, but can we make some progress, and can we set the next generation of folks up to have it better than we had it? I'll leave with a story. I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with my grandfather, my father's father, who, I said, was born in the 1800s. And one of the things my father told me about him, he told me a story about when he was a young man. They were down in Alabama, and folks they were actually out selling vegetables or something, and folks were just being disrespectful to my grandpa, as it was the custom then. I had to get off the sidewalk if white folks walked by. You had to call them sir. My grandfather would have to call a boy sir, right? That was just the way it was. And my father asked the question, why do you let these people treat you this way? And he was angry. And my grandfather said to him, son, I'm trying to get you grown so you can leave here. And the things that I have to take, you won't have to take. And the things that you take, your son won't have to take. And the thing that he takes, his son won't have to take. And eventually, we won't have to take anything at all. And so my point there is that there is a recognition of what's wrong right now, but also a hope that's born of commitment that it will be better. And something that, we used to say at church, trouble don't last always. And so we know that it's going to be tough. But if we don't do the fight, who's going to do it for us? If we're not investing in us, why would we expect anybody else to do it? So, don't be weary in well doing. In due season, we'll reap if we faint not.